This week, planting trees to save the planet. From wildfires to illegal logging, the world's forests have been decimated in the 21st century. Why reforestation is so important if it's done correctly.
Monoculture plantations don't have any biodiversity, they have very low biodiversity, and they don't capture as much carbon as natural forests do.
Carbon offsets are a win-win on paper. Companies get to net zero and countries protect their forests. But our investigation finds that not all projects are what they seem.
As we begin to look at the carbon offset projects themselves, what we found is that the environmental benefits claimed by these companies are not actually what they seem to be.
Plus, crimes against the planet. Newly defined ecocide could soon be a crime tried by the International Criminal Court, putting guilty CEOs on the same level as war criminals.
Damage to nature is simply not taken seriously enough, and we're seeing on an ever more apocalyptic scale what the result of that is.
I'm Kaylee Lyons in New York, and this is Bloomberg Green. We've lost 10% of the world's forests in the last 20 years, and the pace of destruction is not slowing down. According to Brazil's Space Research Agency, last month was the worst on record for Amazon rainforest destruction, with 1,180 square kilometers lost. And after major forest fires in the Amazon, California, and Australia, global attention has now turned to reforestation. But it's not as simple as just planting trees. Bloomberg's Akshat Rati explains 3 lessons about trees and climate.
Trees aren't the simple climate solution you think they are. In trees, we already have a vacuum cleaner for the sky. These majestic species of all shapes and sizes soak up carbon dioxide and store it away for decades or even centuries. But we are losing trees at an alarming rate. We've lost 10% of the world's forest in the last 20 years. That works out to losing a football field worth of trees every second. If we want trees to be a climate solution to their full potential, we don't just need to stop deforestation, but reverse the trend by growing forest cover. Sounds simple, right? But years of trial and error have shown that it is not. Experts who have studied tree planting programs say there are 3 key lessons. 1. Grow a forest, not a plantation. Don't just plant 1 or 2 fast-growing species of trees. They may soak up carbon in the short term, but the lack of diversity makes them vulnerable to pests, droughts, floods, and forest fires. 2. Be careful in choosing where you plant the trees. Trees may soak up carbon, but they also play a significant role in absorbing or reflecting sunlight. Forests closer to the poles may actually increase the warming of the planet. Scientists have found that growing trees closer to the equator is much more beneficial. 3. Beware the risk of green colonialism. If the world needs to plant 1 trillion more trees, then we will need land the size of China to grow them. That kind of expansion will pit human needs against global climate goals. Tree planting should not conflict with the needs of local people. Instead, working with local populations helps ensure that the trees remain sucking up carbon for much longer. Done right, trees will be a key climate solution. But trees aren't a get-out-of-jail card. They won't be effective unless the world cuts emissions first. This is Net Zero. I'm Akshat Rati. For more stories like this, you can find us on your favorite platforms.
Joining us now to talk more about this is Meryl Vandermark. She is from the Rainforest Action Network, an organization that was founded in 1985 with an aim to end deforestation and uphold indigenous human rights. Meryl, it's great to speak with you. Let's talk about the problem first. When we talk about forest destruction, at what scale are we talking?
At a huge scale. Just last year, we lost over 4 million hectares of tropical forests around the world, and this tends to be increasing. So there's a huge deforestation issue. We're losing our main forests, which hold huge biodiversity, that hold most of the biodiversity that we have on Earth, on terrestrial Earth, and that are key to fight climate change.
You mentioned the biodiversity impact. What else do we need to worry about when we think about losing our forest? What other issues result from it?
So forests are a really important carbon sink, as are peatlands that are often together found in the same places as forests. So that's a huge important issue, that we shouldn't lose these carbon sinks. And in fact, we should expand them so that we can capture more carbon and mitigate the impacts of climate change. As I said, they are the major, they hold most of the biodiversity, terrestrial biodiversity on Earth. So that's very important for keeping biodiversity and increasing our resilience for the impacts of climate change. Forests are also home to millions of people that directly depend for their livelihoods on the forest. So protecting these forests is also a way to protect indigenous people, traditional communities that really use the forest as their for their subsistence.
Obviously, carbon offsets are getting a lot of attention as the world looks more toward net zero. Is there anything about the carbon offset market that worries you? Do you get concerned that money may be going to the wrong places?
Yes, absolutely. First, because carbon offsets, they're not the same as decarbonization, right? An offset is just a way it can be just a way to continue polluting while someone else does the work of either protecting the forest or reducing emissions. And we need to reduce the emissions of the world to such a degree that we really need all the companies and banks to reduce their own emissions before they start thinking about offsets. And then there's a huge issue with respecting indigenous people's rights and local communities' rights, because some of these offsets are being imposed top-down on local communities, and they're having huge impacts on their livelihoods, on the rights of defenders, and they're not doing what they're made to do, which is to protect the climate and the forests.
Thank you so much to Meryl Vandermark from the Rainforest Action Network. Coming up, these trees are not what they seem. A Bloomberg investigation uncovers the murky world behind carbon offsets and why the route to net zero might be harder than just planting forests. This is Bloomberg Green.
This is Bloomberg Green. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in New York with your Green Brief.
We at Reliance have adopted this wholeheartedly.
Asia's richest man says businesses need to go green to survive. Mukesh Ambani told the Qatar Economic Forum that he plans to transform all of the units in his conglomerate, Reliance Industries, as he aims for net zero by 2035. His firm got 60% of its revenue from energy in the last year. Australia is rejecting a warning about the Great Barrier Reef. The government is opposing an effort by UNESCO to categorize the world's biggest coral ecosystem as endangered. Australia says the world's reefs are threatened by climate change, but rejects singling out one. And could aluminum be both a cause of climate change and its cure? That's what Goldman Sachs believes. It says demand is expected to surge, with the metal being a key ingredient in green tech, like EVs and solar power. But it's also very carbon intensive, with the bank estimating it generates 2% of all global emissions. And that's your Green Brief. Kaylee?
Thanks, Jen. Net zero is now the holy grail of hundreds of companies and governments around the world. And planting trees may hold the key to progress. Consumers can now fly, buy, and eat, safe in the knowledge that the businesses their money goes to are slashing emissions in the name of climate. Or are they? For many, reducing emissions is certainly a part of the solution, but carbon offsets may be an equal or even bigger part. Billions now flow into projects trying to balance the carbon books. But the big question is, do they work?
It's very important, given the nature of the climate crisis right now, for the general public to have an understanding of what progress is or is not actually happening. And I think many readers right now, they'll see these hundreds and hundreds of companies making these big, bold climate claims. And they would be forgiven to think that, we're well on our way to meeting the emission reduction trajectory we need to be on. And the reality of the matter is we're just not on that trajectory. And a key reason for this sort of disconnect is the use of offsets that aren't doing what they claim to be doing. My name is Ben Elgin. I wrote the story about how the billion-dollar market for carbon offsets is setting back the fight against climate change.
My name is Mark Trexler. I've worked in climate change for the last 30 years. I was actually hired by the World Resources Institute in Washington to work on the first carbon offset project in 1988. In terms of defining a carbon offset, one of the beauties, so to speak, of greenhouse gases, sort of the silver lining of greenhouse gases, when you put up a molecule of CO2 into the atmosphere, it can be anywhere in the planet in 7 days. And therefore, if there's an option to reduce emissions on the other side of the planet, and you can do that very cheaply as compared to doing it in your factory, for example, then why not pay that person, that factory on the other side of the planet to reduce their emissions? Then you are, in a sense, offsetting your emissions, and the atmosphere doesn't really see your emissions anymore.
We've seen a huge surge in companies making big proclamations about how they're going carbon neutral or zeroing out all of their carbon emissions. We began looking at these corporate claims of dramatically reduced emissions, and we noticed so many of these companies were using carbon offsets to achieve these aims. And as we began to look at the carbon offset projects themselves, what we found is that the environmental benefits claimed by these companies are not actually what they seem to be. And as we sort of saw and spotted a number of these very aggressive carbon offset projects, which appeared to be generating inflated credits or bogus credits, we saw a number of them were associated with the Nature Conservancy. And this surprised us. The Nature Conservancy is the world's biggest environmental group. They have about $1 billion a year in revenues. And they've been around for 7 decades. They've preserved about 125 million acres of land. And they've done so many good works over the years, and they've been very strong in terms of working with corporate partners.
Here's 20 new reasons to visit Disney World this year. 1, 2, 3, 4.
If you look at, for instance, Disney, that's a sprawling company with theme parks and cruise lines that burn up diesel fuel. They have office buildings and television studios that consume electricity. So these companies are trying to make major reductions in their carbon footprints, but it's very difficult to change these fundamental ways their businesses operate. So Disney has been a big buyer of carbon offsets that are orchestrated by the Nature Conservancy. One of the projects that they buy from is called Pennsylvania Ridges. And that's a plot of land. Most of the land is actually about a 3-hour drive outside of Philadelphia. Interestingly, this land, 3,000 of these acres, was actually acquired by the Nature Conservancy in the late 1990s. This land was imminently threatened. There was a pending logging contract on this land. So they do what they've done so well for all of these years, which is they go out, they raise money from local philanthropists, and they go buy this land to protect it from developers and loggers. And at the time, according to an archived version of the Nature Conservancy's website, when they were proudly announcing this deal, they said, these threats have been abated because of this acquisition by the Nature Conservancy. So it's really interesting now, fast forward 2 decades to earlier this year when they put forward this carbon project. And if you look through it, this land is a key part of that carbon project. And what they're now saying is this land is now once again imminently threatened. 72% of the trees are going to be cut within 5 years. Now this is just astounding because this land is owned by the Nature Conservancy. They do not clear-cut land that they've bought through philanthropic donations. So this scenario that they've put forward to get carbon revenues is not really plausible. And what that means is when you have Disney coming in and buying these credits, when it eventually lowers its carbon footprint because of these credits, well, that won't be a credible or truthful claim by Disney. So the Nature Conservancy defends vigorously these deals, and they and others will say, look, our projects are just following the rules that these registries set up. So some would also put some of the blame on the registries themselves, because they're setting up the rules which allow these vapid projects to get up and sold. Most of these Nature Conservancy deals are set up and sold on this exchange. It's called the American Carbon Registry.
One of the challenges with designing carbon offset systems is that there are normally two people at the table. You have buyers and you have sellers. And to some extent, you have policymakers, but you know, the buyers and the sellers are really the ones with the expertise, with the incentive to really participate hard, make a lot of things happen. And the challenge there is that both of them sort of want the same thing, or they're both happy with the same thing. They're happy with low-cost offsets and a lot of them. Ultimately, what needs to happen is systemic change. You know, we're sort of nibbling around the edges with some of these different things. We need to change how we produce energy. We need to change how we transport ourselves. We need to change what and how we eat. You know, we need systemic change associated with transitioning to a low carbon economy. A lot of what we're doing today is not promoting systemic change. It's sort of trying to stick your thumb in the dike to preserve the current system. And at the end of the day, that can't really work.
Coming up, environmental destruction harms us all, but could the people behind it soon be tried alongside war criminals? A panel of lawyers thinks they should and is drafting a new definition of ecocide to do so. This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's headquarters in New York, I'm Kaylee Lyons, and this is Bloomberg Green. Well, global environmental rules are patchy at best, which means holding multinational actors to account can be tricky. Even when companies are taken to court, fines are often absorbed and business continues. But now a panel of lawyers is drafting a definition of ecocide to submit to the International Criminal Court in hopes that raising environmental destruction to the level of genocide will rein in some of humanity's worst excesses.
This decade is going to be decisive in how we approach dealing with the climate crisis, dealing with the ecological crisis. And dealing with ecocide is a bit like going to the root cause. So climate change, if you like, it is a symptom, and mass damage and destruction of ecosystems is actually one of the root causes.
When BP spilled 210 million gallons of oil into the Mexican Gulf in 2010, it wasn't just seabirds and dolphins that were the victims. 10 years on, the Natural Resources Defense Council estimates that the overall cost to fisheries in the Gulf was $8.7 billion, with a loss of more than 20,000 jobs. White House Energy Advisor Carol Browner called it the worst environmental disaster the US have faced. BP was hit with a record fine of $20 billion, but deepwater drilling continues to this day. A growing number of people think that the courts did not go far enough.
Damage to nature is simply not taken seriously enough. As we can see, our economic system is set up around maximizing profit and doing so within certain ground rules, like, you don't kill anybody. But those ground rules don't include serious damage to nature. And we're seeing on an ever more apocalyptic scale what the result of that is.
So what if there was a different way? What if, instead of shrugging off fines as exceptional expenses, decision makers could be tried alongside war criminals and those who committed genocide? It may sound extreme, but that's what supporters of ecocide law want.
International criminal law is really about human survival and human dignity. It's very much focused on the human race. So we have genocide, elimination of a human group, or crimes against humanity. What could be more of an international crime? In other words, a crime that no matter where it occurs on the planet affects all of us, than destruction of our very environment.
Kate McIntosh and Jojo Mehta are part of a panel of lawyers currently drafting legislation to be presented to the International Criminal Court, the best chance yet for ecocide to be made into law. It's a long road to ratification, but supporters include French President Emmanuel Macron, Greta Thunberg, and even Pope Francis.
So what we're wanting corporations to see this as is a guardrail, but also as a challenge. It's like, you know what, we want those CEOs to be saying, I can see this coming down the line, and it's very sensible. It's almost like a health and safety regulation for the planet. How do we comply with that new health and safety regulation? We want to be ahead of that curve because we want to be placed in a way to take things forward in a way that is sustainable and that is actually helping the planet to thrive rather than destroying it as we go.
The lawyers pursuing ecocide believe it must be on a level with genocide or crimes against humanity. It might be hard to imagine CEOs in the dock alongside dictators and despots, but it's hoped the threat of prosecution will be enough to change behaviour.
We're not talking about genocidal maniacs or warlords that are trying to win territory. We're talking about basically reasonable people who are going about their business. And I can't imagine that those people would feel comfortable about being potentially prosecuted as an international criminal in the same way that they might feel quite comfortable about dealing with fines that would result from civil suits brought against them.
Despite optimism and widespread public support, ecocide laws are at least a few years off. Even if the ICC accepts the new definition of ecocide, one of its 123 member states will still need to propose it, and the rest will have their turns squabbling over the details. Only then could enforcement begin. Lawyers estimate that could take up to 4 years, but that might be just what businesses need to get their houses in order.
Of course, there will need to be a transition period. I'm not going to, make any bones about that. If we brought this law in tomorrow, it would be chaos. It's not about an instant change that's going to somehow, dump everybody somewhere that they're completely unfamiliar and don't know what to do. This is about looking at something that's coming down the line, because something like this will have to come sooner or later. We're looking at something coming down the line within the next few years that inspires compliance pathways, transition policies, all of these kind of things that will need, adjustments that will need to be made, but will need to be made with a very different future in mind, a future that we all know we have to approach.
The power of ecocide law lies in criminalising the destruction of nature on an individual level. Next time a company causes an oil spill, its decision makers could be facing jail time. And that personal accountability is what its supporters say will drive the change.
Effectively, what you're looking at is an individual being held to account because they're in a decision-making position within that project. And that's precisely, again, where the power comes in, because it's easy to hide behind the corporate veil and have your company fined for something you made a decision for. But once that sort of protection is removed, you're going to think a lot harder. It's a serious concentration for the mind.
That's it for this week's edition, but keep the conversation going. Follow us on Twitter @Climate. I'm Kaylee Lyons in New York, and this is Bloomberg Green.